It's not a gravel bike. It's not a mountain bike. Rivendell calls it a hilly bike, but I think it might actually provide a template for the new crop of ATBs that we're seeing out there. Today, I'm going to review the Susie Longbolts, find out what I like and dislike about it in this video. And just a quick note, if you're interested in bikes like these, you'd probably be interested in our brand new bandana. This bandana has all the things: friction shifters, basket packing, safety pizzas, volet straps, flat pedals, you name it. Once again, we don't have any major sponsors. This YouTube channel is possible because of our Patreon supporters as well as some merch. So if you like this content, you know what to do. When we visited Rivendell last winter, I got to test ride several of their bikes back to back. And of all the ones I tried, the Longbolts was probably the most fun for me, so I'm super stoked to finally get it on the channel to review. Frame and fork are chromoly steel. This particular build is built around 27.5 wheels. The rims are Velocity cliffhangers, the hub is Shimano Dior, and the tires are the super fun and plump Terravale A-lines. Their stated width is 2.5 inches on our calipers. They measure in just under 58 millimeters across. The brakes are the solid and reliable Shimano XT V-brakes. Moving up to the cockpit, it's got a Nitto quill stem, and I believe these are the Billy bars, I think, or I don't think they're the Albatross bars, but I think they're the Billy bars. The brake levers are by Sunrace. The shifter on the right is a left silver shifter done in that upside down alternative shifting way. And the shifter on the left is a right Sunrace shifter turned upside down. It's finished off in their kind of signature new bombs and twine finishing. The front fork has eyelets for a rack and fenders. Looking at the frame itself, it has 3 pack mounts on the down tube, as well as some bottle bosses on the underside of the down tube. And yes, it has a pretty generous sloping top tube, making it easier for riders with shorter legs, or if you have to dab a foot and you're on kind of uneven terrain. Lots of crotch clearance. The cranks are some wide-low silver cranks with a Shimano Dior front derailleur. Rear cassette is 9-speed 11 to 36, and the rear derailleur is a Shimano XT rapid rise derailleur. That's right, super rare, pretty interesting. And again, in the back, it's got all the mounts for a rear rack and fenders. The frame is also finished off with some really nice touches, like some intricate lug work here at the seat cluster, and I think a pretty elegant yet kind of robust looking segmented fork in the front. The seat post, I'm not sure which one it is. It's probably a Nitto. It's a 26.8, so not the common 27.2 seat post size of today. So already by the component list and probably just by looking at the bike, it's already probably turned off a ton of people. No disc brakes, antiquated quill stem. So yes, the bike is definitely not without its quirk. However, I think of all the rivs I've tried personally, this might be one of the most fun and kind of unique handling rivs. For those of you keeping score, this is the smallest one they make. They do their sizing based on your PBH, so pubic bone height. I have a fairly short one at about 75 centimeters. So according to their sizing, the smallest one would have been the best fit. A couple interesting geometry notes is that the head tube angle is 69 degrees. So definitely on the slacker side when you compare it to road and cross inspired gravel bikes. This definitely has a foot more in mountain bike territory without being super slack. With the head tube angle and the rake and the tire size, it is higher trail, but it's nothing crazy. The trail is 71. What is kind of interesting about this bike is it has pretty long chainstays. So the chainstays on this bike are 527. Just for frame of reference, a typical kind of roadie inspired gravel bike is 425. Its chainstay is actually 80 millimeters longer than my hardtack and 67 millimeters longer than the Ritchie Ascent. It doesn't sound like a ton in everyday life measurements, but in terms of bike design, this is a country mile here. I mean, look at this thing. I can put 2 fists between the wheel and the seat tube. You cannot do that with most bikes. In addition, the bike has a pretty long front center for its size. It has a much longer effective top tube, 30 millimeters longer than my hardtack, and 70 millimeters longer than a medium-sized Ritchie Ascent. The name of the game here is long. Long in the rear, long effective top tube. One of the functions of having such a long top tube is the ability to run swept back bars more comfortably. The wheelbase of the bike is also pretty long by today's standards at 1200 millimeters. That's a full 100 millimeters longer than the hardtack and 150 millimeters longer than the Ascent. And I know I just bored you with a bunch of numbers. How does the bike ride? How do these interesting geometry things affect the handling? Well, let's get into it. On flat gravelly stretches, the high trail, the big tires, the longness of the bike just cruises over everything. Seriously, it'll just eat gravel all day long. And you can ride in a fairly relaxed position and not have to micromanage every little bump. Speaking of position, with these handlebars here, you are fairly upright. That changes your weight distribution over the bike as well as the major muscle groups that you use. So in this upright position, I found I was using more of my quads and it was a little bit more difficult to engage my glutes, which are a little bit easier to engage on the drop bar bike where you're kind of tilted more forward. Also, since you are more upright and the natural hand position is behind the steering axis, even though it's a long bike and it's kind of high trail with a biggish tire, it keeps the steering fairly light. I think another benefit of a handlebar setup like this, especially on rougher gravel terrain, is that since you have less weight on the handlebars, you get vibrated to death a lot less. So again, definitely just cruises through the rough stuff on level terrain. In terms of climbing, I think this is where a lot of people will hit more resistance. It's definitely a smooth climber. If you like to stand and dance on the pedals and expect quick herky-jerky movements, this bike doesn't do that. Instead, it kind of glides uphill, no quick accelerations, just kind of steady, even tempo. I did find that for me on steep terrain, this rearward position didn't really work well for climbing. I found myself really reaching for the front here, trying to find a position that was similar to on the hood's position so I could engage the glutes and also pull back on the bars. I think if this were my bike personally, I'd probably move the controls a lot further up so my primary position is a little bit more in line with the steering axis. I felt that when I was standing and climbing using this more rearward position, it felt a little bit squirrely to me. So again, my hands would creep up a little bit further up. Okay, so let's talk about descending. I think this is where this bike really shines. It just has so much stability, so much cush. A lot of things are moving here. You get lots of suspension from the handlebar, from the quill stem, from the tire, from the fork. Short of like really large sized rocks, I feel like you could plow through almost anything. I took it on a few of our rougher gravel loops here in Missoula. It handled it no problem. This bike for me was just an absolute blast to ride. All right, so what are the pros and cons? The first big pro for me is the aesthetics. It's not to everyone's taste. If you can't get over the sloping top tube, it does have some utility. I think the bike has kind of a rugged elegance to it in terms of its swooping lines, but then you see those kind of gnarly, more aggressive tires, and I love that contrast. I think the bike definitely flies under the radar. It doesn't scream mountain bike bro or gravel bro, but it has the chops to handle that kind of terrain. I'm also a big fan of the geometry and the handling of the bike. As you guys may have noticed, I've been reviewing more ATB style bike, and I like this slightly slacker 69-degree head tube angle, which is slacker than cross bikes, but not as slack as a full-on mountain bike. To me, that translates to a ride that is more comfortable going down some chonky stuff than a gravel bike, but is still rideable on roads. It doesn't feel like you're pushing a broken shopping cart all over the place. The phrase that comes to mind is dirt surfer. It just surfs the rough stuff. That's fine and good, but what are the cons? There are a few cons which might be deal breakers. For me, a few technical things, like I wish it had a more standard seat post size, something like 27.2, so that you can run a dropper post. I know not everyone will do this, and in some ways it kind of doesn't mesh with Rivendell's philosophy. But as of late, I've really come to appreciate the dropper, and there are very few, if any, droppers that would work with a 26.8 seat post diameter. The argument could be made that because it's so long and it has a long front center, you don't need a dropper because it's really hard to endo. But descending on paved roads, I found that it was hard to kind of tuck down into something where I didn't feel like a big wind sail. Dropper would have helped. Another minor niggle is kind of like the lack of water bottle mounts. You've got a 3-pack here in the frame, another one down here. I sort of wish they put some bottle mounts in the front. I know you can hack different bags to carry more water. This bike really wants to go on some goofy, rough stuff adventures, and it would be nice to carry some more fluids right out of the box. Probably the biggest potential con is the very upright riding position. While I've come to appreciate a more upright riding position, I think this one with these bars, just can't quite do it yet. Mostly because it forces me to use kind of my quads and just that muscle group. I feel like if the primary hand position was moved up just a little bit, and you can totally do that with a different set of handlebars, then it would make for a more balanced ride where I could use both my quads and my glutes depending on the situation. If you've only ridden road bikes that are not upright, this will definitely drive you crazy and will take some adjustment. But other than that, that's about it. You know, I mean, the quill stem doesn't bother me. I feel like that adds to kind of the softness of the front end. The rim brakes don't really bother me. Neither do the quick release or the old technology. In some ways, I think this is kind of the modern apotheosis of a 90s mountain bike. Functional, simple to service, components, rugged, looks good. In a lot of ways, it's better because it has more tire clearance. It has more stack. You know, some 80s and 90s mountain bikes have notoriously low stack. This, it makes it easier to get upright, not to mention clearance for much wider tires so you can get a much more supple ride. Of all the modernish ATV bikes out there, I feel like that this one is definitely the most chillax one. To me, it definitely feels like kind of a adult cruiser of the apocalypse. So similar vibes as a Jones bike. The front end feels familiar to my hardtack, although a little bit more upright, but definitely feels longer and more chill overall. And same thing with the Ascent. The Ascent has more of a kind of traditional front end geometry, if you will. Who's this for? I think if you're a commuter, I think this bike would make a great super chillax commuter. I also think that this would be a super fun, a little bit overkill gravel bike. Like if you wanted to do an event and kind of sandbag it, but still have a super capable bike, then this is the bike to do it with. Also, if you're like me, where you have some access to mountain bike trails, but you're pretty much going to stay on the green trails or dirt roads, no need to go full on like Red Bull Rampage, then this is a bike to consider. But yeah, so I'm stoked on it. I think it has a lot of the DNA that we're going to see in the upcoming ATB trend, which, by the way, is represented well in our bandana. But that's what I think. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Is this a bike you would ride, or is it too weirdly retro? And if you appreciate bike reviews on kind of more interesting bikes, then please consider supporting the channel on Patreon, buying some stickers and some merch. As always, keep the supple side down.